So welcome to the program. Today we have with us Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, the president of Spelman College, a historically black college in Atlanta, Georgia. We have Dr. Michael Sorrell, the president of Paul Quinn College, a private college in Dallas, Texas, and Mr. Virgil Parker, a Howard University student going into his senior year. We like to talk about how you're managing through some really uncertain times. We know that some HBCUs around the country struggle in normal times, but how are the effects of COVID, some of the racial inequality stuff that's happening around the world, how is this affecting the operations financially and welcoming students back to HBCUs? So I'll jump right into the questions. And I'll start with you first, Dr. Campbell. To what extent do you feel the pandemic has heightened the financial and operational outlook at your school and maybe some other schools? Because I know HBCU presidents have a small, some sort of like a fraternity or a sorority, and so you all talk to each other. So what are they saying are happening on some of the other campuses?
Well, thank you. I think it's important when we answer that question to take a much longer view. And I want to tell a very short story of something that happened to me 30 years ago before I even came to Spelman College. 30 years ago, I sat on the board of my alma mater, which is a wealthy, well-endowed, small liberal arts college in the Northeast. At that time, the admissions officer stood up and told the trustees that the model that we're using for higher education is unsustainable. And that model is year after year affecting tuition increases. Now, when you take that model and you apply it to HBCUs, what you're saying is that you have a demographic from which you're drawing whose median income is what, 56,000 annual income, $56,000. It is not expected to grow. Their net worth of Black families is about $17,000 versus $170,000 for white families. And you can see that if that model is not sustainable for a wealthy college, it cannot possibly be sustainable as a business model for colleges that serve the demographics we serve. And I say that because I think a lot of our HBCUs had come to that reckoning before COVID. And many of us have begun to think in very creative ways. My colleague here, Dr. Sorrell, is one of them, began to think in very creative ways about how to fundamentally change that business model. Certainly Spelman did. So when we came up to COVID, what that meant for us is we had to accelerate that. We had to really step on the gas and really put into place all of these options that we have been thinking about and planning about, because that was going to be our salvation. And so while there's no question that we have been hit hard financially, loss of room and board, we're offering a tuition discount. So although our enrollment is up, we have discounted tuition. We're losing our parking fees, our dining hall fees, all of that revenue is lost. But what we have now is an opportunity to launch some of the initiatives that we have been planning for the past 2 or 3 years that will mitigate our dependence on tuition.
Thank you for that, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Sorrell, same question to you.
Sure. I, much as my sister president talked about, all HBCU presidents and the HBCU community understands the magnitude of funding institutions based on students who come from under-resourced communities, right? We understand the history of funding inequities, but to Sister Campbell's point, we view this through a completely different lens. We have spent zero time crying over what has occurred, right? I mean, for us, I told my staff back in late February because we began planning for this much earlier because of a series of fortunate realizations that we had. And I told them, I said, if you go through the history of higher education, institutions that today are viewed with reverence, there was a triggering event for them. For some, it was a large gift that allowed them to implement things. For others, it was a societal moment that played uniquely into their strong suits. I said, for us, 13 years ago, we went through our financial reckoning. We completely remade the institution. So we know what it's like to have to function under these circumstances. So we said, what we're going to do is we're going to implement all the things that we know we need to do. So when we come out of this moment, we will be a stronger institution. And for us, we have always believed that the business model of higher education made 0 sense, right? And so we think that you have to look at this from an entrepreneurial enterprise, right? And ask yourself, what can you do? What can you effectively sell that insulates you from the structural fluctuations of economies?
Wow.
And that is what we're in the process of doing. So when we come back, so we gave our students cost of attendance breaks, right? We reduced the cost of attendance because that was the right thing to do. And, you know, it's at some point you just have to step back and say, we're going to do right by our students, right? And what we have said is, look, when our students come back, we have new buildings that will be finished. We're adding high schools to the campus. We've entered into business relationships that will fundamentally alter our business model going forward. I mean, and that's just a small bit of what we're doing. And so I think for institutions that are forward thinking, they aren't spending time over what they've lost. And celebrating is not the right word because no one's celebrating anything in this moment, but they're using this moment to structurally change what their tomorrow will look like. And I applaud them for doing that.
That's amazing. And just a quick follow-up, right? I'm a HBCU alum, and I remember a new student orientation shirt, and on the back of the shirt it said, "Struggle is our strength." What are some of the inherent strengths of both of your institutions that make you ready for the pandemic?
We are an inherently imaginative people, inventive people.
Yeah.
We have been doing that for ever since before emancipation. And so what this moment calls out, it calls out that inventiveness. And so
Yes.
we've opened up a great deal of space on our campus for students, for faculty, for staff to come forward with and be part of the conversation of new ideas and new ways of thinking of things. And so this moment, as difficult as it is, and it is difficult, I will not minimize that for a moment, but there is an excitement of energy and new ideas that's percolating on our campus.
So let's pivot and talk just a little bit about instruction and what students can expect this fall and the changes you're making to make sure that the same high quality education will happen, but also that there's a sense of belonging. And you know, once you step on an HBCU campus for freshman orientation, this link to the campus kind of cements you there. So how do you ensure that in the space of virtual learning? Dr. Sorrell?
Oh, well, first, let me just give credit where credit's due. One of the very best examples of doing that is Spelman, right? I mean, Spelman conveys this sense so strongly that Spelman women don't just feel cemented to their campus. The children they haven't had yet feel cemented to the campus, right? Like my daughter is 5 and she will tell you without batting an eye, when I graduate from Spelman, I'm going to go do this, right? My son is to the point where he's looking at my wife like, really, Mom? Really? So it's part of this is conveying the sense of history, right? And the inevitability of you as a member of that continuum of history, right? That those who came before you did extraordinary things with a fraction of what you have at your disposal. So it is incumbent upon you as a caretaker of our race and of this society that you not only continue that, but that you take it to the next level, right? I mean, now, for us, what we're telling our students and what we tell our community is that no problem is ever solved, right? The days where you have permanently solved or found a solution, that's over. The best you can do is solve for this moment with an eye towards how you evolve for the next. And so, you know, we looked at it from, you know, your point on instruction. we were already a hybrid institution because we're an urban work college. Our students go off campus and work in addition to go to class. So there was always a necessity to be able to deliver their instruction using both methods. Now we have partnered with the Minerva Project out of San Francisco, which is a global institution, and we're using their platform. And we've created an honors college, an urban scholars program. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary because we had already begun the process of remaking the academic experience. This has just allowed us to look at it through a different lens. And let's be honest, I'm fascinated by institutions that talk about how difficult it is for them to deliver online learning, and who talk about the inferiority of online instruction. And I think that's a little disingenuous, because if you just follow this, right, we have figured out as a society how to deliver every experience virtually. We have taught you to have intimate friendships virtually. You can date virtually. You can shop virtually. So the people who taught the people who created these systems somehow are incapable of delivering the same academic experience online. Come on, right? I mean, that's just not true. It's not true, and it's insincere. But I think what you're going to see, to President Campbell's point, is institutions smart institutions wholeheartedly embracing collaboration, right? Because we are absolutely stronger together than we are separate, and none of us need to look at each other as adversaries.
Thank you, Dr. Sorrell. Dr. Campbell, what about you?
Yeah, I second everything my colleague has said. And I will say something that has struck me in the 5 years that I've been at Spelman is I've noticed that our faculty love their students. Now that might sound corny, but they love their students. They have high expectations and they have high demands they put on them, and they want them to succeed. And so they think a lot about teaching. Before COVID, what are the good methods? What are the strategies? What are the ways that I've done? How have you done it? And we actually have developed a literature from our faculty on teaching and learning before COVID. When COVID happened, we noticed immediately our faculty started forming groups talking about teaching. What works? What doesn't work? Well, I tried this and I tried that. So all we had to do was put support around that. We gave them training in online so they know all the range of technological tools that are available. The other thing we noticed is about what is successful when students study. And we determined very, very quickly that students are successful when they can form cohorts and groups. We actually had a summer program where part of the program was it was mandatory, but you had to appear on screen for your study group every night at 8 o'clock, no excuses. At the end, when we did evaluation, that was the favorite part for our students. So we've taken our entire first year class and divided them into student success groups. That's what we call them. So it's not just that you have to raise your hand and say, I need a tutor, and maybe feel ashamed about going to a tutor. You have a group who is responsible, and everybody is responsible for each other's success. And frankly, that's kind of the essence of that Spelman sisterhood that Dr. Sorrell was talking about. So we've taken some of our fundamental traditions and we've turned them into positive experiences digitally to work for us. So it's actually been, as I said, it's been very exciting to see these new sort of techniques and approaches emerge.
If I can chime in there. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Virgil. I was going to say, from the perspective of a student, I have got to agree with President Campbell and President Sorrell. So to President Campbell's point, Howard University, like other HBCUs, it's a family, right? Particularly from our teachers and especially from our administrators. I like to say we have a plethora of campus mothers and aunties, and even our male teachers and faculty members and administrators who lean into us. And I noticed from beginning in the month of March, when we transitioned to Zoom and Blackboard and other forms of online learning, what was most appreciative of our faculty was that they were understanding, they were supportive, and they were embracing, right? It was a novelty time. We had never experienced like that, something, at least I had not, and the students on that campus had never experienced that kind of transition, that kind of abrupt transition. So, just as us as students had to be patient with our faculty to adapt to the online learning model, because, our presidents can tell you, they prepared a curriculum for January that was supposed to be meant for in-person instruction, but quickly had to transition once coronavirus came about. But the feeling of effective and accurate and high quality instruction never left. The integrity of Howard University and its instruction had never left, and the loving and care and appreciation of our teachers had never left. And you felt that through the camera screen every single day.
I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to, according to the United Negro College Fund, about 70% of the almost 400,000 students enrolled in historically black colleges right now come from low-income families. And so are there any special considerations you've made or additional investments? Dr. Campbell, you mentioned earlier about the reduced tuition, but what considerations have you made for those students as they go into this school term?
We have erected quite an elaborate scaffolding around our students. As is the case with Dr. Sorrell, we of course received CARES money that enabled us to give students immediately, give them emergency funds. Also, we were able to get 850 donors to our emergency fund. So we were able to give them the sort of life grants, money to pay rent or to meet medical expenses or childcare expenses, or to buy some computer equipment. And in fact, we just on a widespread basis bought a great deal of computer equipment and transmitted to students, faculty, and staff. So there was that. But then as we looked at the coming year, I'm very, very struck by what Dr. Sorrell said. We did everything to make Spelman affordable. So students could take courses during the summer, 500 of them did, at deeply discounted rates. We discounted our tuition, and if you add in the fees, it was almost 14%. Because of the very generous gift that we got from Mackenzie Scott, we gave every single student a $3,000 award over and beyond any other financial aid they got. And we will once again offer discounted tuition for JMS. So we have looked around at every term to try to figure out how do we let these students continue to hold on. This is a tough time, and we're crossing a bridge over troubled waters, and just hold on, because we're going to get there. So that's been our philosophy.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Sorrell?
Sure. So annually, 80 to 85% of our students are Pell Grant recipients. So this is a space that we live in continuously. And so much so that we have changed the entire vision of our institution to be one where our institutional goal is the eradication of intergenerational poverty, right? Because every issue that we noticed came back to the same core origin. And that was the lack of resources. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, let's imagine every single thing we do from the perspective of how do we provide relief for the students. So here's a sample of how we've done that. One, we implemented a summer school program where, typically maybe every year, not counting our entering students who are in our bridge program, maybe 5 or 10% of our students go to summer school. This year, we had over 70% of our students go to summer school because we realized that we needed to keep them tied to the institution to provide, emotional support, consistency, and all of that. And it gave us a way of continuously evaluating where they were from the standpoint of just their life day-to-day experiences. We restructured the fee relationship that the students have with the school. So, we said, look, it's a stressful time. So how do we create a financial model that reduces the stress on the students? Let's simplify it. So we said, all we're going to charge for our tuition, we're going to charge the health fee, and we're going to charge, what was our other fee? There's one more. Oh, technology fee, right? Everything else comes off, okay? And the idea was, because that's easy for people to understand. When you are already in a heightened state of anxiety, you don't want to look down at your bill. And because look, I love us, but you know how we can get, right? what is this? I don't understand. They're trying to rip me up. Like, come on, we know, right? So if you look at it and you say tuition, my health services fee, which I know I need, because last year, ahead of COVID, the Lord just smiled on us. We implemented something called Quinn Cares, which was virtual healthcare, right? And mental health care. So you got that fee. And then just your technology fee, right? Because you understand why you're paying a technology fee. So then we reduced the cost of attendance by $2,500 across the board, right? Every student that needed computers and Wi-Fi, we sent them to them, right? They got those for free. We changed the class scheduling. So we did a survey and discovered that literally we only had, and I'm not making this up, 35 students that didn't have to work either full-time, more than full-time, or work more than they would have had to under normal circumstances, right? Like, I mean, it blew us away. We knew that there was significant financial hardship. Then the next piece that we realized was we asked about how many of you are responsible for childcare? And it wasn't their children. They're taking care of their brothers and sisters, their cousins, their nieces and nephews. They became primary caregivers. So there was no longer the ability to say class is going to take place at 9 a.m. because no one could really from week to week commit to a schedule. So we had to have class times, then we had to record everything so students could take it down when they had the ability to participate, right? So I have so much love for my faculty for being able to pivot and deliver the experience that way. And let me say this, we do not give enough credit to HBCU faculty, right? Because we think just because they aren't publishing, this research that, is important, but that they somehow aren't phenomenal. And they are teachers. They are, to Virgil's point, they are aunts, they are uncles, right? Some cases they are mama and them, right? Like, they are doing things that are extraordinary. And only in a world where we believe that the people who are delivering the education on the front line to our students are devalued because they aren't researching instead of placing a premium on teaching, do those types of individuals not be celebrated? And they have to be celebrated because they're doing what we need them to do. So I just wanted to make sure I got that across. And then the other thing that we did was the increasing of wraparound services. So even though we are remote, we have reached into the communities where the students live and stood in the gap and helped match them up with wraparound services that they may need. So we have just rethought our entire student engagement model to be able to do those things.
Wow. So just a quick pivot, and only because Dr. Campbell, because you mentioned this, recently we've seen and heard of like these amazing gifts that have gone to HBCUs. And over the years, we've heard of some big gifts, but we don't hear of enough of them. And so how are you all thinking about fundraising in this climate, in a climate where you can't invite folks to campuses? And so what are you doing differently to raise money for your respective schools?
Well, thank you for that question, because I want to go back to Spelman's founding, right? In 1881 by these two white women teachers who came from North Salem, Massachusetts. And they would have to go, just like I do, they would go out and fundraise. And they're standing in a church one day and they're trying to raise money for Spelman. And in the audience is John D. Rockefeller and his wife, Laura Spelman Rockefeller. And I mentioned them because Laura Spelman's family were abolitionists. Fervent, real, their house was on the Underground Railroad. And she believed so deeply that they had a moral responsibility to be part of building the future for the emancipated slaves. And I say that because it seems to me that building these coalitions of Black, white, green, purple, I don't care what color you are, but you believe that this country is still in a process of rebuilding and of repairing all the damage that was done post-emancipation, right? And so thinking of and that's what I think of fundraising. We're all in this circle trying to accomplish a better place here for Black people and for Black people to build their own wealth. I think we have great involvement in social justice, great involvement in education and medicine. I also want to see us have great involvement in building wealth as well. And approaching that, what we have found is that there are people who want to be part of that circle. And so many of these gifts, when Patty Quillen and Reed Hastings said as much publicly, we want to bring white wealth into these Black institutions to build something that's necessary for everybody to be successful in this country. So I think that's how we have approached it. And that's a narrative that many people feel they want to be part of. And so and this is that historical moment, that triggering moment that Dr. Sorrell talked about. It's one of those triggering moments that invites even more to come into that circle.
Dr. Sorrell, and then I'm going to ask Virgil for some advice.
Sure. So first, let me say this. There is a sentiment in some circles that the institutions that aren't Spelman, Howard, Hampton, and Morehouse are resentful for the amazing transformational gifts that those institutions are receiving. Let me just say right now, from where we sit, nothing could be further from the truth. I celebrate their successes. I am so proud of those institutions, in part because I have family members who attended them, but in other part because how about we just be cheerleaders for all of us, right? I mean, their success doesn't mean that we're not going to have an opportunity to participate in fundraising success. So I just want to take a moment just to tell people who might listen to this and think there's some division there. No, right? No. I celebrate their successes. I danced as much, maybe not as much as I would have danced if it was coming to me, but I danced a lot, right? So let me just say that. We are out aggressively fundraising, but I want to be very transparent here. I am in the process of building a model so that my successor doesn't have to fundraise, right? Wow. So I just think that it is important that, there's something that I teach the students in the class that I teach. And I tell them that, and this comes from the history of the AME Church, right? That's inspired by that the people who fund your dream control your dream, right? You no longer have your dream, you have the dream that your funders allow you to have. Now, what Spelman has been extraordinary at in some of the other institutions is finding donors who are aligned with their vision. It is amazing, but I don't want to have to depend on, I don't want my institution's future to have to depend on that. I want it to be a part of what we do, but we are building an economic model where we will be able to self-fund our institution. So we are fundraising aggressively while simultaneously perfecting our model so that whoever sits in this seat when I have gone on to do whatever I go on to do, right? Maybe chase behind kids and look for ways to pay for Spelman for my daughter, right? That they are financially in a much different place. And this moment in time affords us that opportunity.
Virgil, the last couple of questions to you, and their advice. What advice would you give college presidents and administrators right now from a student perspective about what you need to be successful over this semester and maybe the entire school term?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one advice I'd give to administrators is to listen to your student governments, right? So students are finding ways to communicate, again, for us, our HUSA, our student association, what our plights are, what our needs are, what challenges we're facing. Be it, as I believe Dr. Sorrell mentioned, that distractions in the home space, be it having issues economically at home, not being able to afford things. What's being communicated to the student governments and student associations can funnel up towards the administration, and we really have to hear that out. So I know that as President Campbell mentioned the CARES Act that came out and how they're providing that kind of streamlined funding to the students. As much as it is possible, I would ask HBCU leaders to continue to do that as long as it's affordable to the institution. And that is going a long way, it has for me. And then I love how Dr. Sorrell broke down how they re-examine the cost of attendance and realize that lessening it would be a much more feasible practicality for these families. So I think that is one of the best pieces of advice to listen to the student associations.
Dr. Campbell, Dr. Sorrell, I think we're almost out of time, but is there any last words you'd like to offer before we leave? Anything you're burning that needs to be known about this year, your school, or just HBCUs in general?
No, the only thing I just want to say is every year I have a President's Reading Circle, and I invite about a dozen students to read some really interesting books with me. You know, Just Mercy, some Alice Walker novels. Last year we did Toni Morrison because she passed away. And I just say that one of the joys of being at an HBCU is to be surrounded by students, by faculty and staff, every single one of them, who are there for a purpose. And that's the purpose, to hone their skills so they can reach out their hand and take the next generation and bring it along. And it's something that is absolutely necessary and something that we, like leaders like Dr. Sorrell and others, intend to preserve for many centuries to come.
Yeah, the only piece that I would offer is this. We're going to get to the other side, right? This is a moment in time, right? And it's a moment in time that is meant to put something in us that fortifies us, that strengthens us, that toughens us. And I think it should be viewed for what it is. It is not meant to break us, right? We are, you know, I tell my students this all the time. For you to be standing here today, it means that you are from some of the strongest stock to ever walk the face of this earth, right? Your ancestors survived the Middle Passage, right? They survived the horrors of slavery. For you to be here, so inside of you, your DNA is wired to achieve. And that's for all of our institutions. They are made of people of that stock. So we will get to the other side. And then the one other thing that I would say too is get to know the HBCU community and its beauty in all forms, right? I mean, you know, to Virgil's point about Howard's homecoming, if you haven't experienced a Howard homecoming, hey, you need to have that experience, right? When I was in graduate school at Duke, I had that experience. I tried to have it in college, but my mother dimed me out to my coach, and that was a whole other story. But my point is, there's so many wonderful things. You know, our corporate work program is a thing of beauty. If you are a Black woman, the experience that you have at even if you don't go, because everyone can't go, you need to at least see it so you understand what that looks like. But there are those types of things at all of our institutions. Do not buy into a narrative that they are not beautiful, that they are not strong, that they are not unique. They are.
I wanted to add one last thing about how HBCUs across the country are not only being anchors to their students, but also to the surrounding communities. I mean, I love how President Sorrell mentioned how post this pandemic, when students return back to the campus, there's going to be new renovations for buildings, but particularly high schools and early learning programs. That's essential. You know, in the state of COVID-19, even with the traditional struggles and now amplified struggles that HBCUs are going through, they are planning for the future on how to be resourceful for their surrounding communities of neighborhoods and residents. And I can speak to, from what I understand at Howard, what we've continued to do with that. You know, we have an early learning program. We have in high school, and I even understand that with our School of Dentistry in our hospital, we're still providing these types of services that are needed to the community. You know, Howard University Hospital was designated as a COVID-19 treatment facility by the DC government, and Dr. Frederick even partnered with the DC government to expand testing in certain other parts of Washington, DC. Those type of models for HBCUs are critically important because it discusses how these institutions are paramount to the success of America, to the surrounding communities, and even through the time of struggle, which to Dr. Sorrell's point is only a journey. It's not something we should embrace. We still continue to be that symbol and that vertical of opportunity.
Thank you, Virgil. Dr. Campbell,
Absolutely.
Dr. Sorrell, Mr. Parker, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for your thoughtful answers to the questions and your advice and the direction for others to be able to follow as we all continue to navigate through some really uncertain and uncharted territories through the next year and so forth. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You.
Absolutely. Thank you.